The first time Karen approached Jake's porch, she wore her signature smirk, the one that suggested she held a clipboard even when she didn't. "Afternoon," she said, squinting against the sun like it offended her. "We need to have a chat about appearances." Jake looked up from the old Harley engine he was tinkering with, wiping grease from his hands. He was in cargo shorts, a worn veteran cap, and a faded shirt that read, "Freedom ain't free." He leaned back in his creaky chair, letting the wind catch the jazz drifting from his radio. "Something wrong, ma'am?" Karen folded her arms. "This isn't a mechanic's alleyway. It's Sycamore Glen, a community with standards. You've been here less than a week, and I've already received complaints." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Complaints? About me sitting on my own porch?" She pursed her lips. "Not just that. The motorcycle parts, the decor." She gestured to the hanging wind chimes and an American flag with subtle disgust. "It's not exactly in keeping with neighborhood aesthetics." Jake glanced around. Each house on the street looked identical. Pale gray paint, matching hedges, perfectly sterilized. His uncle's house, now his, was a breath of life by comparison. His porch had color, music, personality. "I'm not violating any laws," Jake said simply. Karen stepped closer. "You're violating the spirit of the community. And as president of the HOA, it's my responsibility to uphold that spirit." Jake offered a calm smile. "I served 3 tours. I've seen what happens when people try to control how others live. Never ends well." Karen narrowed her eyes. "This is your first warning." She turned on her heel and marched down the walkway, heels clicking like a judge's gavel. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Notice of noncompliance. Front porch use not in accordance with HOA Regulation 3.4. Leisure activity and visible materials must adhere to the neighborhood's visual harmony standards. Jake read it twice, then chuckled. He folded it, set it beside his coffee, and continued sanding down a rusted chrome panel. That evening, an older neighbor, Mr. Delgado, wandered over. "Don't mind her," he said, nodding toward Karen's house down the block. "Last month, she fined a teenager for having a skateboard on the lawn. Called a rolling hazard." Jake grinned. "Sounds like she runs this place like a dictatorship." Delgado sighed. "Pretty much. Most of us just stay quiet to avoid trouble. I've been here 20 years. Never seen someone push back." Jake looked at the letter again. Maybe it's time someone did. By the end of the week, Jake had 3 more letters. One for his non-uniform porch furniture, another for mechanical equipment visible from the street, and a third for inappropriate music volume. Even though he played jazz at a whisper, he didn't reply. He documented. Every letter was dated, photographed, and filed. Every interaction with Karen was recorded on a tiny body cam hidden in his porch light. He wasn't going to fight her with yelling. He'd learned patience in desert heat and under enemy fire. This was just paperwork and politics. Karen, meanwhile, escalated. She began patrolling past his house 3 times a day, taking photos with her phone. Once, she even crossed the lawn to inspect the porch furniture's tags. When Jake asked her to leave his property, she smirked. HOA regulations allow board members to perform visual assessments for compliance. Jake replied, "That's fine. Just don't trip on the lawsuit." She blinked. He didn't. Saturday morning, Jake set up a small folding table on his porch with a pitcher of lemonade and a plate of cookies. He invited Mr. Delgado and a few other neighbors over. They hesitated at first, unsure whether socializing under Karen's watchful eye was worth it. But Jake's charm, dry humor, and genuine warmth melted through. For the first time in a long while, laughter echoed on Sycamore Glen. Karen stood across the street, arms folded, seething. "You're creating a spectacle," she said, marching over. Jake stood, calm and cordial. "Just a few neighbors enjoying the day. This is exactly the kind of behavior that lowers property values," she hissed. Mr. Delgado scoffed. "You mean people talking?" Karen ignored him. "I'll be issuing citations for unsanctioned gatherings." Jake leaned in, voice low but clear. "You want to throw it down, Karen? Be careful. I read every bylaw last night. I know exactly how far your power goes. and how much of it you've already overstepped. Karen's face twitched. You don't scare me. Jake smiled. I'm not trying to, but you're about to learn that I don't scare easy either. That night, Jake stood alone on the porch. Jazz saw behind him, sipping from a tin mug. The street was quiet again, but it felt different. He'd stirred something, pushed against the invisible wall Karen had built around the neighborhood. He picked up his phone and stared at the contact list. One name blinked at him. Tank. He hadn't called in years. The last time they'd seen each other was at a funeral for a brother who hadn't made it home. But Jake knew if he dialed that number, it would mean more than a catch-up. It would mean opening a door to something bigger. He looked at the pile of HOA citations beside his chair, then back at his phone. He tapped the screen. Tank, he said when the line picked up. A gruff voice replied. Holy hell, Jake. That you? Yeah, got a situation. Need help? Jake looked out across the neighborhood. Rows of perfect homes under a perfect sky, all held hostage by one woman's need for control. Yeah, he said. I think I do. The next morning, Jake woke to the sound of a drone humming above his porch. He stepped outside, coffee in hand, and watched the little machine hover, dip, and whirl. It angled downward, recording his yard. Karen stood across the street again, phone in hand, orchestrating the operation like a general surveying a battlefield. Jake stared at her calmly and raised his cup. The drone zipped off seconds later. Inside, he added the incident to his log. The file had grown thick time-stamped letters, videos, recordings, and now aerial surveillance. It wasn't just petty oversight anymore. Karen was waging a war. Later that afternoon, another envelope was taped to his door. Violation notice. Improper lawn chair fabric. Per HOA Regulation 2.1.3, all outdoor furnishings must conform to HOA-approved neutral color palettes. Your red and black camping chair is non-compliant. Jake didn't laugh. He didn't scowl. He simply added it to the stack and kept tightening the bolts on a refurbished headlamp. His phone buzzed. Tank, you sure this is just about patio furniture, man? Jake smirked. Not anymore. Karen had begun gathering allies HOA board members who mirrored her rigidity, neighbors who feared her scrutiny more than they valued fairness. Together, they turned Sycamore Glen into a neighborhood of spies. The Delgados received a fine for unauthorized sidewalk chalk after their grandkids drew butterflies near the mailbox. Mrs. Ng, who always kept potted orchids outside her door, was told her arrangement was non-standard foliage. Even Mr. Patel's backyard cookout was interrupted by Karen claiming smoke intrusion. Jake watched it all. Each complaint, each ridiculous rule, confirmed what he'd suspected. Karen didn't just love control, she needed it. And he was disrupting her ecosystem. She didn't fear chaos. She feared exposure. Inside his garage, Jake pulled a thick folder from a box labeled Uncle Ray, HOA docs. He hadn't paid much attention to it during the move, but now he flipped through every page with laser focus. Bylaw amendments, election protocols, expense ledgers, meeting minutes, and something odd 2 pages that had clearly been photocopied from different documents, spliced together to create a faux signature sheet approving a fee increase. Jake's brow furrowed. A pattern was emerging. Karen had been rewriting rules without proper procedure, finding residents for offenses that didn't legally exist, and funneling HOA dues into special projects with no documentation. The HOA was a mask. Underneath, she was running a private kingdom. He didn't need to shout or protest. He needed to cut off the crown. The next day, he called in a favor. Tank arrived within hours, roaring up the street on a restored Triumph Bonneville. He parked in front of Jake's house, dusted off his boots, and removed his helmet to reveal a face as weathered as Jake's, not older, maybe, but sharp-eyed and sturdy. Damn, man. She really called in the petty police, Tank said, eyeing the identical houses with suspicion, like living inside a brochure for artificial happiness. Jake replied. They shook hands, clapping shoulders like brothers. Brought someone with me, Tank added, nodding toward the corner. A second rider pulled up a tall woman with a braided ponytail and a lawyer's gaze. Meet Roxy, Tank said. Paralegal now. Used to be with our chapter. Smart as hell. Roxy stepped off her bike, scanned the porch, then the clipboard taped to the door. HOA overreach, fraudulent amendments, and a pattern of targeted harassment, she said, flipping through her tablet. I can build a case. Jake exhaled. Then let's start building. Over the next week, the bikers didn't invade. They blended. Tank returned with 3 more riders veterans like Jake. They didn't blare music or rev engines unnecessarily. They helped fix fences, trimmed hedges, and delivered groceries to elderly neighbors. The neighborhood didn't know what to make of them. Karen, however, was furious. These people don't belong here, she barked during the monthly HOA meeting, which Jake attended quietly from the back. They're intimidating residents. They're undermining the values we've worked to protect. They've helped more people in 4 days than you have in 4 years, Mr. Delgado muttered. Karen ignored him. We must enact emergency provisions to preserve our neighborhood's integrity. I motioned to fine Jake Evans $1,000 for continued disruption and unauthorized porch assemblies. Jake stood slowly. I'd like to see the regulation that allows you to fine me for sitting on my own property, speaking to neighbors, and listening to music at the decibel level of a whisper. Karen's lips thinned. Jake held up a printed sheet. Also, I'd like to submit a challenge to all recent amendments passed under Article 9, due to lack of public vote and improper filing. Gasps stirred around the room. Roxy stepped forward. Filed legally. Served to the board. My credentials are attached. If the board doesn't halt all actions against Mr. Evans until the matter is resolved, we'll escalate to county court. Karen looked like someone had slapped her with a ledger. That night, Jake sat on his porch as the sun dipped low, casting golden shadows across the block. The air smelled of jasmine and charcoal. Music floated gently from his radio beat B. King tonight, one of the younger neighbors, a teenage boy, walked up and said, "Hey, my dad said thanks for, standing up." Jake smiled. We look out for each other. That's what neighborhoods are supposed to be. He sipped his drink and watched as Tank, Roxy, and the others rode slowly down the street, not roaring, not flaunting, just present. Karen closed her blinds when they passed. Jake leaned back in his chair. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Karen hadn't left her house in 2 days. Her blinds remained tightly shut, her manicured front yard unusually unkempt, and the daily drone surveillance mysteriously ceased. For a woman who operated like clockwork, the silence was louder than her usual crusades. Jake knew it wasn't over. Power like Karen's didn't fade. Quietly it retreated to regroup. Inside his garage, Roxy set up her mobile legal station. Stacks of HOA documentation lined the table beside a laptop humming with research tabs. "She's lawyered up," Roxy muttered without looking up. "Just filed a countersuit claims you're orchestrating a targeted neighborhood intimidation campaign." Jake blinked. "For hosting cookouts and helping Mrs. Ing fix her porch light?" Tank chuckled from the corner. "They always spin it. Control freaks don't lose gracefully." Roxy tapped the keyboard. "Here's the catch. Her suit delays the review of your evidence. No hearing, no investigation. Just a stall tactic. She's buying time." Jake crossed his arms, thinking. Then we take the time she's buying and spend it wisely. Karen wasn't always the monster behind the curtain. That much became clear when Jake visited the county records office. He pulled her file public info, nothing shady, and flipped through the old HOA newsletters. Karen had once been just another resident with a passion for gardening and neighborhood safety. But 6 years ago, a burglary changed everything. Her husband's watch collection was stolen while she was out of town. The thief was never caught, and neighbors whispered it had been an inside job, a kid with a gate code, maybe even a neighbor's child. After that, Karen's hobby turned into obsession. She ran for HOA president, rewrote the bylaws, and turned Sycamore Glen into her fortress. Jake handed the newsletter to Tank. She doesn't want control. She wants safety. She thinks they're the same thing. Tank nodded. But safety at the cost of everyone else's freedom? That's not community. That's a cage. Karen's next move came unexpectedly. Monday morning, Jake awoke to flashing lights outside his house. 2 sheriff deputies stood by his driveway, speaking quietly with Karen, who was holding a printed folder. Jake stepped outside calmly. "Mr. Evans," one deputy said, "we received a report of unregistered group meetings, suspected gang activity, and possible zoning violations." Jake nodded slowly, then pointed to the folder. "Let me guess. That's our evidence." The deputy held it up. Inside were photos of Tank, Roxy, and the others' group shots, bike license plates, even pictures of Jake talking to kids near the community playground. "She's trying to paint this like a biker invasion," Tank muttered under his breath. Jake turned to the deputy. "You can check my permits, my business registration for the repairs I do, and even the local ordinances. We're all clean." The deputy, to his credit, seemed hesitant. "This neighborhood has rules," Karen interrupted sharply, "and his guests are violating every one of them." Jake locked eyes with her. "They're not guests anymore, Karen. They're neighbors, because neighbors help. They listen, and they don't weaponize rules out of fear." For the first time, Karen looked unsettled. The deputy glanced between them, sighed, and said, "We'll file this as a civil dispute, not a criminal one." Karen's jaw clenched. Jake smiled. "Have a good day, officer." The confrontation lit a fire in the neighborhood. Residents who had once whispered from behind their blinds began stepping out, literally and figuratively. Mrs. Ng hosted a tea gathering on her front lawn. The Delgados organized a small book exchange. Even the stern Mr. Patel hung string lights from his porch and shared homemade samosas with Tank's crew. Jake watched it unfold with quiet pride. It wasn't just about him anymore. The neighborhood was waking up. But Karen wasn't done. That evening, HOA board members arrived at Jake's door with a formal letter. Notice of special hearing, immediate expulsion vote. Karen was moving to have Jake evicted from the HOA jurisdiction altogether, not just fined, erased. Roxy read the document aloud. She's citing an obscure clause protection from hostile elements last used during a mold outbreak in 2009 to temporarily evacuate a house. Jake laughed. "So now I'm mold?" "Not quite," Roxy said. "But if they win the vote, you'll either be forced to sell or face relentless liens until your home becomes legally uninhabitable." Tank stepped forward. "Time to fight dirty?" Jake shook his head. "Time to fight smart." The night before the hearing, Jake called an emergency block meeting. He didn't demand attendance. He simply invited anyone who felt like the neighborhood had stopped feeling like home. They came in folding chairs, lawn recliners, and picnic blankets. Some brought food, others brought questions. Jake stood on the edge of his porch, hands resting on the rail. "I'm not trying to destroy the HOA," he began. "I'm trying to restore it. We're supposed to protect each other, not punish each other." He pulled out a small projector and clicked it on. Images appeared on a hung sheet. Copies of Karen's forged amendments, missing vote records, and proof of misused funds Roxy's compiled evidence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jake let it settle, then said, "Tomorrow, you'll be asked to vote whether I belong here. But really, the vote's not about me. It's about whether you belong here." Silence. Then Mrs. Ng spoke, soft but certain. "We do." Mr. Patel nodded. "We always did." Jake switched off the projector. "Then let's take it back." The community center was silent, except for the rustle of papers and the low hum of the overhead lights. Fluorescent beams cast cold shadows on the folding tables arranged in a horseshoe shape, where the HOA board members sat stiff-backed, faces unreadable. Jake stood at the center of it all, facing them. Across from him, Karen perched like a statue, immaculately dressed, spine straight, her mouth set in a hard, unwavering line. In her hands, she clutched a binder thick with allegations, rules, and printed screenshots her arsenal. Roxy sat behind Jake, tapping away on her tablet, documents ready to counter every claim. Tank leaned against the wall, arms folded, unreadable. Behind them, a small but growing crowd of neighbors filled the back of the room. Jake looked out at them, faces he now knew, people he'd helped, spoken with, shared meals beside. This wasn't just about property lines anymore. This was about identity. Karen rose. "As president of the Sycamore Glen Homeowners Association, I move to expel Jacob Evans from HOA jurisdiction on grounds of repeat violations, neighborhood disturbance and nonconformity with HOA cultural standards. She said the last part with venom, then set the binder down with a thud. The evidence has been submitted. You've all seen it. This is not personal, it's protection. Jake stepped forward. Protection from what? He asked calmly. From porch furniture? From barbecues? From neighbors who don't look like carbon copies of your blueprint for acceptable? He turned to the room, not the board. Karen built her authority on fear of change, of difference, of losing control. But look around. What have we really lost under her rule? Freedom, warmth, community. We became tenants in our own homes. He let that hang in the air. Then Roxy passed him a file, and he laid it gently on the table. These are the documents proving Karen altered HOA rules without a proper vote. These show funds spent on security, expenses never approved by the board. And these, he held up a page, show that what's been called nonconformity is really just noncompliance with her vision, not ours. Karen stiffened. Lies. Fabrications. You're manipulating. No, Mr. Delgado interrupted from the back. You are. Karen spun around. Last summer, you fined us for having visitors park on the street for 15 minutes. That wasn't about safety. That was about control. I have always upheld the HOA charter, she snapped. You rewrote the charter, Mrs. Ng added quietly, and you didn't tell us. Gasps and murmurs rose. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Karen's composure began to fray. This neighborhood used to be peaceful, pristine. That's all I've ever tried to protect. And what you're protecting, Jake said, is a version of peace where you're the only one who gets to speak. Silence settled. One of the board members, a soft-spoken man named Allen, cleared his throat. Let's take the vote. The ballots were handed out. Simple slips of paper with one question. Should Jacob Evans be removed from the Sycamore Glen HOA? Yes or no? Jake took a deep breath. He'd done all he could. This wasn't about evidence anymore. It was about hearts, about whether the neighborhood wanted to reclaim its soul. The votes were collected, counted. The chairperson, an older woman who rarely spoke at meetings, stood and read the results. 3 in favor of removal, 4 against. Jake's shoulders relaxed, just a little. He turned, looked at the neighbors behind him, Mr. Delgado with his arms crossed, Mrs. Ng holding back tears, and Mr. Patel nodding once. Firmly, they had chosen, not just him, but each other. Karen stood frozen. Then, slowly, she gathered her binder and walked out without another word. Outside, dusk was falling. The street lamps flickered on, casting a golden hue over the sidewalks. Jake stepped into the cool air and exhaled, the tension of weeks finally starting to leave his chest. Roxy followed him out, tucking her tablet into her bag. Well, she said with a small smile, that's the first time I've used HOA bylaws as a weapon of the people. Tank let out a low whistle. Didn't think she'd go that quiet. She's not done, Jake replied. She'll try something else. But now, people are watching. People care. As they walked down the sidewalk toward Jake's house, neighbors began to emerge from their homes. Not cautiously like before, but boldly. Some carried lawn chairs. Others brought drinks. A few even wheeled out barbecue grills. Jake paused at his porch, speechless. What's this? He asked. Mrs. Ng smiled, handing him a plate of spring rolls. It's a block party. We're taking our street back. Laughter echoed. Lights twinkled. Music drifted out of windows. The very things Karen once fined people for had become a declaration. This was no longer her fortress. It was everyone's home. Karen didn't show her face for days after the vote. Her blinds remained drawn. The no loitering sign vanished from her front lawn. The flower bed she once pruned with surgical precision brown beneath the sun, untouched. She had become a ghost in the very neighborhood she once ruled with an iron clipboard. But ghosts still haunt. Jake knew better than to assume silence meant surrender. He spent the following week helping neighbors repair fences, repaint porches, and swap stories over late-night coffee. The air on Sycamore Glen shifted more human, less plastic. Lawn ornaments returned. A mural went up on a retaining wall. Kids chalked hopscotch patterns on the sidewalks without fear of fines. Still, Jake felt the tension like unfinished business coiling beneath the calm. Then came the letter. It arrived without fanfare, slipped under his door in a plain envelope. Notice of civil litigation, personal defamation, and HOA damages. Jake read it once. Then again. Slowly. Karen had filed a personal lawsuit, not through the HOA. This time it was personal. He handed the letter to Roxy, who scanned it, her expression unreadable. She's suing you for ruining her reputation, causing emotional distress, and for alleged slander during the vote. She wants financial compensation and a formal apology in writing. Jake raised an eyebrow. She wants me to fund her ego restoration? She's backed into a corner, Roxy said. People like Karen can't survive without control. She's trying to punish you for making her powerless. Jake nodded. Then we don't just fight. We finish this. The hearing took place in a small civil courtroom downtown. Karen arrived in her signature beige blazer, expression calm but brittle. Her lawyer stiff and overconfident spoke with the ease of someone used to winning by default. Jake wore jeans and a black collared shirt. Nothing flashy, just grounded. The judge, a woman with a stern jaw and a sharp gaze, reviewed the documents silently for minutes before speaking. Ms. Caldwell, she said, addressing Karen, you presented claims of character defamation, reputational loss, and emotional damages due to actions taken by Mr. Evans during his defense in an HOA conflict. Is that correct? Karen nodded, composed. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Evans' false accusations and reckless behavior publicly humiliated me and have made it impossible for me to live peacefully in my own neighborhood. Jake's attorney, a calm but razor-smart woman named Lila, stood. Your Honor, we submit that Ms. Caldwell's so-called humiliation stems not from false claims, but from the exposure of her own misconduct. We have documentation of forged amendments, misappropriated HOA funds, and a pattern of target harassment, including against Mr. Evans. Lila handed over folders. The judge flipped through them. Her expression hardened. I see. Karen's smile faltered. I also see, the judge added, that Ms. Caldwell filed a defamation suit after losing a vote initiated by herself to remove Mr. Evans from his home. A vote which failed democratically, based on the evidence he presented. So, tell me where exactly is the slander? Karen opened her mouth, but no words came. The courtroom was quiet enough to hear the click of the judge's pen as she set it down. Case dismissed. And Ms. Caldwell, this court does not appreciate attempts to use the legal system for personal vendettas. If further frivolous filings are submitted, sanctions will follow. Karen blinked, stunned. Her lawyer stammered quiet. Understood, Your Honor. Jake didn't smile. He simply breathed. For the first time in weeks, it was over. The following weekend, Jake received a knock at his door. It was just past sunset. Lanterns glowed softly from porch eaves along the block. The scent of barbecue still lingered in the air. Karen stood alone on his porch. No blazer, no binder, just a tired expression, a sweater too big for a frame, and a woman trying not to unravel. Jake said nothing. She spoke first. I'm leaving. He raised an eyebrow. I listed the house, she added. Too many people look at me like I'm something I don't recognize anymore. Maybe I became that. Jake leaned against the doorframe. Why tell me? Karen exhaled. Because I needed someone to blame when everything started feeling different. And you made it too easy. She paused and added, but you were never the problem. I was just afraid. Jake nodded. Afraid of what? That if people stopped needing my rules, they'd stop needing me. A long silence passed between them. Jake broke it gently. People don't need control. They need connection. Karen didn't answer, but she looked down, her voice barely a whisper. Take care of the neighborhood. He watched her walk away, not defeated, just stunned. Weeks later, Sycamore Glen bloomed. Literally, a community garden replaced Karen's barren lot. Tank helped install benches. Mrs. Ng painted wooden signs in English and Mandarin. Roxy started holding weekly workshops, legal literacy nights for tenants and homeowners alike. The HOA didn't dissolve, but it transformed. Its new board, led by a rotating team of volunteers, Focus on safety with compassion. Enforcement became education. Fines became conversations. Fear became transparency. Jake sat on his porch one warm Friday evening, watching kids race scooters under string lights. Tank handed him a drink. "You did it, brother." Jake smiled. "We did." From across the street, a young couple waved. Mr. Patel shouted an invite to dinner. Music spilled from speakers as a grill fired up 2 doors down. It was imperfect. It was messy. It was alive. And it was home.